Okay, we are now live on YouTube, and I will head to the conference room shortly. Okay, good morning and welcome to our Queensborough President Land Use Public Hearing. This hearing is taking place both in person in the Borough President's Conference Room and on our YouTube channel at Queens BP. I am Vicki Garvey, the Planning Director for Queensborough President Donovan Richards, and I will be chairing this hearing on his behalf. For those who wish to testify virtually and haven't already pre-registered to do so, please visit our website at queensbp.nyc.gov. Written testimony is also welcome from those who are unable to testify in real time. All written testimony must be received by 5 p.m. today and may be submitted by planning2, that's planning and the number 2, at queensbp.nyc.gov or by conventional mail sent to the office of the Queensborough President at 120-55 Queens Boulevard, room 226, Kew Gardens, New York, 11424. They can also be hand delivered as well. I will now review how this public hearing will proceed. The public hearing shall be conducted in the following manner. The applicant will give a description of the requested zoning actions, the proposed project, and respond to any questions from the chair. The floor will then be open for public speakers. Please listen for your name to be called. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to ask questions and/or deliver testimony. When you are called, please identify yourself for the record, and if you are formally speaking as a representative or member of a group, the calendar number or application you are speaking about, and whether you are for or against the item. Then you may begin your testimony. Please note that a signal will ring when your time is up. At the discretion of the chair, if there is a large number of speakers on any particular item, it may be put on second call. Speakers for and against that item may also be called to testify on an alternating basis. Please note that if you are testifying virtually, you must keep your camera on during your testimony and display your name accurately on Zoom. Thank you for your cooperation. And again, the chair reserves the right to ask speakers for clarifications or further information regarding the applications or comments. So now I will call the first and only calendar item. So items number 1 and 2 are related. ULIP number 250253 ZMQ and ULIP number N250254 ZRQ. The applicant is Federici Builders Corporation, and the affected community board is Board 4. So applicant, you may begin your presentation.
Good morning. My name is Frank St. Jacques with Ackerman LLP. We represent this application. If you bear with me one moment, I'll share my screen and begin a presentation. Could you just confirm that you could see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. So as noted, we are here representing this application to the Department of City Planning for 5020 108th Street rezoning. I'll walk you through some of the neighborhood context, describe the zoning actions and the project that would be facilitated by the proposed land use actions. The rezoning area is shown here on this zoning map in an inset. It's located currently within R6B and R6B C23 zoning districts that were established in the 1989 Department of City Planning initiated Elmhurst Corona rezoning about 37 years ago. And before that time, this area was previously zoned R6 and R6 C22 with the enactment of the 1961 zoning resolution. The area is within the greater transit, the greater transit zone in the sub area, the outer transit zone. But there's a zoning provision that applies the beyond the greater transit zone parking rules for non-MIH units. So moving forward, this tax map shows the proposed two development sites. Here, Site 1 and Site 2. The bounding streets, 108th Street, 51st Avenue, Corona Avenue, and 50th Avenue. In addition to the two applicant-owned sites, which I'll describe in a moment, there are several non-applicant-owned properties which are shaded in yellow at the western edge of the southern block, bounded by 50th Avenue and 51st Avenue. Development Site 1 is the larger of the two development sites on that southernmost block. It's approximately 28,000 square feet. It contains a few low-rise buildings and is mostly unimproved with a parking lot. And then Development Site 2 across 50th Avenue is an approximately 15,000 square foot corner lot. It's improved with a lumber yard, which is considered a non-conforming use as there's currently no commercial overlay. Both sites, again, are owned and controlled by the applicant and are proposed to be redeveloped pursuant to the rezoning. Again, the applicant has no ownership or control of the non-applicant owned properties. These are included within the proposed rezoning area because they're similarly situated, and I'll describe the land use rationale in just a moment. Just some quick context, the land uses are shown here on this map, essentially along 108th Street and Corona Avenue. These are both wide streets and represent north-south corridors through the area. There's a mix of commercial and mixed use, residential and commercial uses, some within the commercial overlays that are shown here with the hatched portions. And then, the mid blocks are generally lower density residential. There are some institutional uses, and as you can see, some non-conforming industrial use, which is shaded in purple. Mass transit options are available within the surrounding area, bus lines, including the Q23 and the Q58. And the Corona Plaza subway station is about 9 blocks to the north, and the 111th Street subway station is about 5 blocks and one long block. Both are just over about a half mile north of the rezoning area. You can also see there's a park at the convergence of Triangular Park, where 108th Street and Corona Avenue intersect, effectively creating a wider street condition just south of the proposed project area between 51st Avenue and where 108th Street and Corona Avenue intersect. I'll just go through these aerial views quickly. This is showing that context I just described in the land use map and on the tax map. You have the non-conforming industrial lumber yard on an otherwise residential block, and then the commercial uses on the southern block, and a relatively large surface parking lot. And then the balance of the block is, for the most part, smaller individual homes. And again, that context there, just looking from the south. So we're here seeking two land use actions. The first is a zoning map amendment or rezoning to change the existing R6B and R6B C23 to allow an increase in residential density at the R7A designation, maintaining that same depth of the commercial overlay, but changing the C23 to a C24, as well as a zoning text amendment. That would be the second action to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area. The zoning change is shown here on the left-hand side of the street, or excuse me, the left-hand side of the screen is the existing R6B with that overlay along the southern edge of the southern block, essentially along Corona, wrapping over to 108th along 51st Avenue. The right-hand side of the screen shows the proposed R7A, again capturing that corner of the northern block to capture the proposed development site 2 there, and then the entirety of that southern block. The current R6B zoning regulations are shown on the left-hand side of the screen. Essentially, the maximum building height would be 65 feet. Maximum residential FAR would be 2.4. And in contrast, the R7A would allow an increase in density, a building height of up to 115 feet or 11 stories, a maximum residential FAR of 5.01, so just a little bit more than double. And then some of the corresponding non-residential use FARs, which are lower than the total maximum FAR. The land use rationale is that 108th Street and Corona are both wide streets. I noted that sort of wider street condition at the southern edge of the site where William F. Moore Memorial Park is situated. We believe that the properties that are proposed to be redeveloped are currently underutilized, and this presents an opportunity to situate new development with an increase in density along wide streets with access to transit. I noted that the sites are underdeveloped. These are currently a non-conforming lumberyard on an otherwise residential block, as well as the relatively large surface parking lot. If these properties had been redeveloped, both before this time, pursuant to the R6B zoning regulations, they wouldn't be considered underdeveloped. But the R6B zoning does not present an opportunity to redevelop the property with a feasible new housing or mixed-use development. Moving forward, just showing the MIH map is contiguous with the proposed rezoning area. This would require permanently income-restricted housing or affordable housing with any residential development that would have to conform or comply with the MIH requirements. Okay, moving forward, I'll quickly just go through both projects combined. So these are the statistics for both buildings together. The building to the south, which is Site 1, would be an 8-story building. The building to the north on the smaller site, Site 2, would be a 7-story building. The breakdowns of the total floor area are shown there, about 216,000 total, 184 of which would be residential, just shy of 17,000 community facility, and about 15,000 commercial. The total number of units is 196, a quarter of which, or 49, would be permanently income restricted or affordable units under MIH. The unit distribution is shown there. About 25% studios, 36% 1-bedrooms, 31% 2-bedrooms, and 8% 3-bedrooms, and 95 garage parking spaces. Again, this is across the two buildings. Both buildings are shown here in this illustrative rendering, and you can see that where the bulk is situated as much as possible along 108th Street, and then at the southern edge of the Site 1, such that it's facing convergence of, or the intersection of Corona and 108th Street. I'll show you both buildings in a moment, but just want to point out that both are stepped down. Site 2 to the north has a step down from 7 stories on the the western edge of that site, and then along on the Site 1 building, the larger of the two buildings, also has step downs on the north and western edges of that building. I'll show you those in a moment. So moving to the southern site, again, this is the larger site, Site 1. This would be an 8-story mixed-use building. The breakdown is shown here. I'll just focus on the units. It's 122 of the total units on both development sites, 31 of which would be MIH units, and this building would have 60 garage parking spaces. The site plan is shown here. Maybe a little bit hard to see, but essentially the tallest portion of the building, the 8-story portion, is this sort of L-shaped wrapping 108th Street and 51st Avenue. Building steps down to 5 stories and then to 4 stories moving northward, and similarly along the southern frontage moving westward, 5 stories to 4 stories. This is a large site, gives some flexibility in terms of not needing to maximize the full R7A envelope, which again would permit a building up to 11 stories. The most efficient building, that avoids the additional costs and has the most efficiency is an 8-story building, even with these step downs at the north and west. The ground floor has commercial use or retail along the southern edge within the commercial overlay, and then community facility use at the northeastern corner of the site and the northernmost portion of the site. The community facility uses for either building have not been determined yet. These are large spaces that could be divided and could house certain community users. If we were able to identify partnerships, that's something we're actively looking at. At this point, we're thinking either daycare or medical facility use would also be appropriate for this community facility space. Moving to the second development site, again, this is the smaller site to the north, which is currently the lumberyard. Smaller site, smaller building, so we're at 7 stories, about 75,000 total square feet, 74 apartments, 18 of which would be MIH. Apologies for the crossed out 30 there. We had started with fewer parking spaces and added some through this process. So we're at about 35 spaces for this building. You can see that step down from 7 to 5 stories on the western edge of the site. And again, here on the site plan, you can see that the 7-story portion wraps this corner, extends westward along 50th Avenue, but then steps down within about 27 feet of the western lot line of the development site. This building would not have a commercial overlay, so the non-residential use within the building would be reserved for community facility. Again, another large space that could be, a daycare, a medical office, or some mix of those uses, and creating space for a nonprofit or another community facility use. I'll just run through the MIH, and then that concludes my presentation. This project has looked at MIH option 1. MIH option 1 would require 25% of the residential floor area to be permanently income restricted or affordable at a weighted average of 60% AMI with 10% set aside at 40% AMI. I believe this is in line with the median income for the area. Reaching those lowest incomes are very close to the median income in this area. So 20 units at 40% AMI, 9 at 60% AMI, and then 20 at 80% AMI. Again, the median in this area is between 40 and 60%. So we believe we'll hit, the spectrum represented by the median in this area reaching sort of at and below, and then up to 80%, so that we meet the needs of the community. The breakdown of the income restricted units is shown here. Again, that's 20 at 40% AMI with a mix of studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s, 9 at 60, and then 20 at 80. We had heard that the community board is alerted us to the fact that they would like to see MIH option 3. That is not part of our application, but we wouldn't object to adding an MIH option 3 to the MIH map if the application were to be modified. I'll just finally note that this is an area that historically has not seen a lot of housing development. The housing stock is For the most part, about 85% is at least 40 years old. And it's one of the highest rent burdened districts within Queens. It is, in fact, the sixth highest rent burden population in New York City and the second highest in Queens. So it's a little higher than Queens overall and certainly higher than New York City overall. Um, in the interest of time, I will conclude my presentation now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Frank. I do have a few questions, and some of them you did answer along the way. So, um, at the the land use committee meeting, there were a few questions raised about the racial equity report, and I know that you may not have had the answers then. I just wanted to follow up and see if those questions that were raised were answered, and if you could just give a quick recap about that.
Sure. I'm not sure that I answered them to the satisfaction of the full community board. The racial equity report, intended to advise community boards and decision makers about these projects, whether there's a risk of racial displacement resulting from these projects. Our racial equity report does not reach a conclusion there. None of these applications do. But what it does, the racial equity report does do is, provide information as to how this project would affirmatively further fair housing and promote equitable access to opportunity. It's a pretty lengthy report. It's very data heavy. I think ultimately the goal of the racial equity report is to create a record, shine a light on, whether large area-wide rezonings or smaller private rezonings are in the furtherance of housing production, also creating issues with respect to displacement or gentrification. I think it's obviously it's a balance. These are both, building housing is incredibly important in a housing crisis, as is avoiding displacement and gentrification. So, our hope is that this project meets the balance. What it does do is provide new housing in a neighborhood that hasn't had much housing production, had very little, and certainly also provides that set aside for permanently income restricted or affordable housing, reaching that low level of 40% within the mix. So I'll stop there, but I think ultimately we cannot, and I'm not sure that anyone can predict whether precisely this project will have an adverse or a positive impact on racial displacement. But the data, the demographic data about the community is there for the decision makers to make their own assessment of.
Okay, understood. I just wanted to follow up on that.
Yeah.
And then in that same vein, I know that Board 4 met last night, had the hearing and the vote. Do you mind just giving a brief recap about that?
Sure. So I don't have the exact count. I believe it was, the vote was for a disapproval, not a disapproval with conditions, just a disapproval. There were about six to my count, and don't hold me to that, votes it was a vote against disapproving the application, but the motion was to disapprove the application with no conditions. This sort of tracks with the committee's vote to disapprove the application without conditions. I understand that there's a lengthy recommendation that will be published as well, that would be supplemented by land use consultant that also spoke. I think there's concerns about the scale, and for to not to overgeneralize, but the potential impact of this project on the neighborhood. As I noted, and is clear, this is otherwise a very low density neighborhood. We can't hide the ball on that. This would be one of the largest buildings, even at 8 stories and 7 stories, within the surrounding area. our response to that is that we think that, replacing these existing uses with new housing, including new permanently affordable housing, would ultimately benefit the community. But, we just couldn't, meet on that. I think there's, sort of additional concerns about, whether um, the envelope itself at R7A, which allows a higher building, would be appropriate, even if the applicant is only seeking to develop a lower building. So I, I don't want to overgeneralize, but those are sort of the main concerns. And obviously, as you noted before, there's concern about, whether or not ultimately this project or any project would create displacement. One thing I'll just touch on is, there's a very valid question as to, this R6B zoning district does allow for new residential development today. That is true. And in fact, under City of Yes and zoning for quality and affordability, the R6B now allows a slightly bigger building than it did before if you were to use UAP or the universal affordability preference. But still even utilizing the current R6B, it just does not produce an economically feasible building. So just from a strictly economic development perspective, there's not a viable as of right development here. So I just wanted to make that point because that was something that came up at the community board, and just wanted to be clear that there's not a path forward that doesn't involve, an increase in density here.
Right. And with this rezoning, we're triggering MIH, so we're actually gaining some affordable units here that otherwise wouldn't be built if this was an as of right project. So I acknowledge that. Okay, so pivoting to the non-applicant areas, I know you may not have this answer, but just wanted to ask it for the record. Do you know what the plans are for those current businesses? Have you spoken to those property owners? Just want to get a sense of that area.
So I just want to clarify for the portion of the rezoning area that was shaded in yellow that's not owned by the applicant.
Correct.
Yeah, so we had sent out a mailing to inform those property owners. That was sent in between the land use committee and the full board. I think because any rezoning application is required to prepare an environmental assessment statement to determine if there's significant adverse impacts related to the rezoning. When we looked at all those properties, for the most part, they're all entirely individually owned, and are sort of smaller, 2 and 3 story residential buildings. We did not project that any of those, with one exception, would be redeveloped, even if they're included in the R7A zoning. So my understanding, and sorry, I'll just stay on that for a moment. We did look at the corner site at the intersection of Corona and sorry, that's 50th, just to project development there for a conservative environmental review. But I think, unless those buildings, which are those properties which are individually owned, were combined into a larger development site, our environmental analysis determined that it would be unlikely that they'd be redeveloped pursuant to the rezoning. If you're asking about the existing businesses within, the owner and applicant is a long-standing owner, and still operates a business out of this site. He's indicated that he'd like to bring the businesses back. They, of course, would be displaced for a time during construction. So, there's a commitment to working with those businesses to ensure that they can either relocate or trying to mitigate the concerns with respect to displacement. So I'm not sure at what stage that conversation is at, but I know, from discussion with the owner and applicant, that there's a commitment to make sure that those businesses are taken care of because they've been sort of longstanding, at this location.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to get a better sense of the status going on there. And so you mentioned there are you have not identified any operators for either community facility space. Um, I guess this is more of a comment than a question. If this application were to be approved, I absolutely suggest and recommend that you work with our office, the council member's office, to identify groups that may need space in that district or groups that are looking to relocate into that district. We absolutely would like to be involved as well as the community board. So I just want to make that clear for the record as well.
Of course, and I'll just quickly say I neglected to say that, but that's understood, and at this point we're very much willing and would welcome that conversation. To be candid, this project began with the former council member who is we're now working with council member Chanel Thomas Henry. So we were hope to sort of reignite that conversation with your office and with her office to identify needs in the community and tenant that space appropriately.
Okay, great. Last question. You may have went over this briefly, but just want to call more attention to it. If you could just sort of summarize or point out any, sustainable or energy efficient aspects within the proposed developments that may exceed what's legally mandated. I just want to acknowledge that Board 4 often experiences a heat island effect. I know that these two developments are right next to a park, but largely that district is lacking in a lot of open space and parks.
Sure.
So would love to see or hear more about the sustainable aspects with the project.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the development would meet all the construction code, electrical code, energy conservation code requirements, as well as any DEP requirements for stormwater. These buildings are proposed to be all electric, which reduces energy and water consumption. They'd have advanced lighting controls, energy efficient windows and doors, Energy Star appliances, and low flow plumbing fixtures. Both wood buildings are intended to have green roofs, which facilitates stormwater management as well as reduces that heat island effect that you get from non-green roofs. The buildings would also be wired to accommodate the installation of solar panels if it was determined that they are appropriate sites for solar. And then the off-street parking garages would contain electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And one of the things that we discussed with the applicant is in the event that required street tree plantings, surrounding for the required street trees are determined to be infeasible rather than paying into the tree fund. There's an option now to install rain gardens in existing tree pits. So that's something that the applicant would be happy to explore to increase flood resiliency and sustainability for this project. Similarly, as with the community facility recommendations, we're happy to take recommendations as it relates to sustainability and flood resiliency.
Great, thank you, Frank. Okay, so that was the end of my questions. I guess Sola, one of our planners, if you could just let me know if anyone is waiting to speak virtually on Zoom.
There's nobody here to speak virtually.
Okay, so seeing as there's no one testifying virtually and there's no one here in person to testify, I'm just going to go ahead and close this hearing. So our next scheduled hybrid land use public hearing is on Thursday, March 26th, starting at 9:30 a.m. Thank you very much for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.